would be?
We believe so.
Considerably?
The Northern Relief wastewater is hundreds of millions.
Well, the project for the upgrades about 13, 14, but there's still a significant cost. We haven't done this detailed estimates on that as we have on some of the other options, but just by physically length and knowing the lay rates for large diameter stormwater interceptors, it's by no means any less expensive.
So the Randall has got the main Northern Relief sewer running under there?
Yes, I believe that.
And has that been repaired, renewed?
No, it has not had any work yet.
Is it due for it?
Yeah.
Also, I'd like to foreshadow an amendment at the appropriate time.
Thank you. There are other questions? Yanni?
I'm still kind of struggling to understand the modelling in terms of the impact of the sea coming in and the water having nowhere to go. It still seems to me that even if we go back to what we had before the earthquake, you're possibly going to still have issues. You just try and help me understand, like, because when I went to the Avon Loop when it was flooding, you could see the water was stagnant, it wasn't moving. So it's just ponding, turning into a big lake, which would seem to indicate that some of the concerns we heard yesterday are quite legitimate. So I don't quite understand how what's proposed is going to help move the water out.
Well, really, it's getting the water to the Avon itself. There's no increase in flood risk in Banks Avenue. They weren't flooded during the March event to the same extent as the people up in Flockton area. So that water level that we saw in March at the high tide is no worse after this work than it was beforehand. Despite the fact that you might have backwater, you might have a high tide that's influencing the Avon at that point.
Have we done like any hydrological studies to understand?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. There's been
how the water can escape.
Absolutely, it's all been hydraulically modelled, as we've said, right through. There's been a whole river and tidal report that GHD had worked on, right. And Tom was well engaged in that process.
So the simple answer is that if it meets the sea and it's high tide, it gets stuck anyway. There's just nowhere for it to
That's
go.
it, unless, and that was why there's another consideration going on in parallel with that river and tidal flood protection to look at the alternatives such as a tidal barrage that would prevent that tidal backwater coming up the Avon. So that's another piece of work that the team are currently looking at.
Right. And then just the second question from me is around the Francis Ave. It was pretty hard to hear from the Francis Ave residents yesterday, and I just really wanted to understand why we can't do anything to mitigate. If we're not, are we doing anything to reduce that risk, or is that just too difficult?
Well, there is a recommendation proposed, staff recommendation proposed to investigate extending the scheme up to Francis Ave, and within the report there's a couple of concepts that we might pursue. There's a drainage that's on the local stormwater drainage network, collecting flows from Francis Ave on a piece of pipe called the Flockton Invert, and that runs through numerous private properties. So there would be challenges with extending the scheme up, but we need to do more investigation to understand the cost of that. Although our modelling does include all the pipe networks, and we believe that the earthquake effect will be mitigated with what we're proposing. It doesn't mean flooding will go away on Francis Ave at all. There will still be considerable flooding of the street and properties, but we do propose to investigate that further in the next stage.
Okay. And then feel free to rule this out of order, but just in terms of the funding, my understanding was that we were talking to government about, obviously with the EQC stuff that's come out, I just am not quite clear where we've got to in terms of the conversation about the flood impact, damage infrastructure.
The court case only came out yesterday,
yeah, that's what I mean.
And that does give us the basis for continuing that conversation with EQC as well. So that they're part of the total package.
Okay. And it will be through, we do have capacity through the horizontal infrastructure cost share. Correct. To access funding from the Crown around this as infrastructure.
I think the staff answered that before, that there is a bit of work that's being done in conjunction with Sarah to get a better understanding of what is in the cost share for horizontal infrastructure, what sits outside because it's part of our ordinary maintenance or renewals contract, and also what could be.
Future.
There was a third one.
Climate change, sea level rise.
The climate change, sea level rise, if there was an issue in that as well, because of course that wouldn't be co-funded. Yep.
Just like to point out a bit of a error on the map in some respects. Polton Ave finishes right where the purple line intersects with it. And in fact, if you took that line that goes through the Marion College and continued it in a straight line almost, you can see Woodchester Ave coming up there. All the houses on the right-hand side of Woodchester Ave is red zone. You would effectively have a straight line from Marion College right out to the river. And you go across Richmond Park, and it would be, you would not be touching hardly a single tree, maybe a few around Marion College, but from there on, it's a straight hike to the river.
Yeah, and that was a consideration as well.
Yeah, so Polton Ave is not a consideration. Well, if you took the blue line, I suppose, yes, you would have trouble coming up Polton Ave with trees and things, but from my point of view, I think that purple line, it's a straight hike,
Yeah.
right across Richmond Park, right across red zone, straight through Marion.
Yeah.
It's a straight line all the way.
Correct.
Is Richmond, what's the status of Richmond Park? Is that...
Well, it is.
Still
Eh?
It's our park.
Yes, I
recreation.
know that, but
It's
is it actually being used, you know,
Oh, yeah.
like...
Yeah, they play cricket and rugby there, but I
Right.
mean, you could put an enclosed box channel under it, put the dirt back on top of it, and you've still got a playing field.
Right.
The proposal.
No, I'm just checking. I'm just checking.
But the proposal is there for open channel, which would mean that easier access for maintenance. If we went
Okay.
across the park, it would need to be a pipe. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you could detour around Richmond Park a little bit, but essentially it's a straight line either side of Richmond Park,
Yeah, no, we understand that.
Yeah.
box section through it.
And that would be something that we could look at, because taking a straight line in a pipe through the cricket ground potentially avoids some of the trees around the perimeter of the
Yeah,
park.
that's right.
So it's a discussion to be had if we're to look further at that route. But a piped option might be more expensive than
Well,
a channel-
you
an
probably
open
have to
channel
do
around
a
the outside.
piped option across Richmond Park, but it could be open either side of it.
But it would be good to have, you know, some dollars and cents and
Yeah.
some costings and a proposal around that. 'Cause, so we've got a foreshadowed resolution. Are we able to get it typed up or? Okay. So are there any other questions before we get to that? Because it'll just give us a couple of minutes to. Yeah, sure.
Do you feel that you've really considered all the options? I mean, we've had a lot of feedback through the submission process the last few days, and councillors have received a lot of feedback from a whole range of, you know, amateur engineers all over the city with their views, and they may not be obviously have perfect information, but
Oh,
I do worry that
Just
we
type
haven't
it out.
actually given, you know,
Yeah.
this is a highly engineered solution, which we've been looking at for some time. But as we've gone through this
Oh.
process, more and more people have come forward with a wider look, including some of the sort of, you know, downstream catchment
the
areas, stormwater management, retreat even. I think that hasn't really been discussed enough, especially when we look at the numbers involved, and they're probably only going to go up. And what worries me is that we haven't quite taken a lot of that stuff into account.
Yeah, as I say, there were myriads of options considered, and some that we have that may have been discounted fairly early on within the team or the wider team. One of them, for example, deep aquifer recharge, pumping the water simply into the ground. But the risks around contaminating drinking water and those sorts of things were eliminated. But there was several submissions from the private sector on the aquifer recharge, probably several, 2 or 3. Others from the tanking, house raising, the floating foundations, any number of things. And there's a limit to really how much you do a high-level analysis of the costings, the practicalities, and then through a process of decision-making, optimised decision-making process, you narrow those down. We come with a suite of 3 or 4, and we had a few of those worked up in March of this year when we had the big event on the 4th of March.
What about
but any number of those options, they may work.
What about the Bruce White proposal?
That came late in the piece during the March event. Engaged with the task force in the heat of the moment. They actually looked at it. So it might not have been a thorough piece of work, but Jacobs was in the middle of the task force, as were many other consultancies working with us in that group. They looked at it from the point of view of the shape and style, what the conflicts with other services, prepared a report, did an analysis, says costings, it didn't stack up with even then their option A and option B. And so that was through the stage 1 of the task force when they did that. And
in terms of retreat, any sort of further feelings about that?
The retreat, what do we have, 160 properties or so, 158. Indicative costs there were 99 plus million. And that didn't address everyone because they're not all in the same location. So you have others that are scattered outside that retreat area. So how big do you make that retreat area? What do you do with that land? You're losing future income from rates. Where do those people go? The loss of community. There was a whole lot of things, as well as the dollar cost. We looked at the social, environmental and economic aspects of the impact of a retreat. And we've had workshops around that and to do that sort of multi-criteria analysis. And it wasn't favoured in the surveys and the engagements we had with the people up there. There was a handful that said, just buy us out, just red zoners or blue zoners, whatever it's going to be, and just take our property. But again, who's got the $100 million to do a buyout solution?
Well, this is going to end up costing us $100 million by the time we're through.
We're talking in the, there's always a cost risk, but we're at the upper bound of our estimating, and that estimating will improve as we get through the detailed design.
And I mean, what about several submitters have said actually the water just can't get out? So once it gets down to the bottom, it ends up ponding anyway because you've got tidal flows coming in.
Yep.
And also there's just not enough gravity pulling that water down.
Yep.
So the whole thing tends to pond anyway. So why not actually just make it a pond?
So if you're saying the constraints of the Avon River and the water gets down there and it stops moving, it means that the fact that the Banks Avenue people aren't flooding is testimony to the fact that the levels that are getting away through the Avon to the ocean are sufficient to deal with that amount of water. And the basis of the modelling is that water level does not change after the improvement work. So it's got hydraulic head, so there is the hydraulic grade line is what determines the capacity of the channel, and that was one of the limiting criteria on the modelling analysis. And of course, there's smarter modellers than I around who all over that sort of detail.
Phil?
John, I was just going to clarify. One of the submitters this morning said that in fact council hadn't engaged with him. That was Mr. White. My understanding was that there'd been certainly some conversations with staff and Mr. White. Can you assure us of that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And now he met with, even as busy as Mike Galuli was, they met with, Matt and Mike met with Mr. White, who then wanted to have a further conversation and he made an appointment with me. So I said, look, we're really busy. We're doing a report to council in August. I said, as soon as that report's landed, I'll spend some time with you. And I had an hour with him talking about the possible solution. He was talking about the possibility of him coming on to help deliver the solution. And we had a fairly amicable conversation. And I said there would be an opportunity to make any submissions to any proposals that might come out.
Yanni?
I just really wanted to be clear that the reason there is no flooding in Banks Ave is because people haven't self-reported it or because we've observed it and there's been no flooding. Because what we heard yesterday was that, and I guess I kind of know this firsthand from the Avon Loop, is that there's some people that just weren't living there that wouldn't have rung up or made contact with council, not because they didn't get flooded, but simply because they're waiting for EQC, they're waiting for insurance companies, they're not in their property. So how do you know that Banks Ave wasn't flooded? Is that What's that based on?
We have no data on flooded floors in Banks Avenue, either through our task force, either through the information we've shared with EQC and insurance companies. So not self-reported, not observed.
But we didn't actually go out and observe during floods.
There's people all over Banks Avenue doing survey pickups and monitoring where water levels had risen, and there would be information in the Banks Avenue area from the task force.
Okay.
But nothing reported.
But there's no chance that, people weren't at home and didn't report.
Look, if there was someone flooded and hadn't reported it to us, we would never know. But we have actually exchanged data with insurance companies now, although we don't have address
But
details.
if they're waiting for a rebuild, then they're not going to make a claim to the insurance company that the place is flooded. Are they? I mean, people have actually literally moved out of those houses, some houses, and I don't know how many are in Banks Ave, that, because I thought they did say yesterday that there were 2 floor levels that were breached, but they said that both the houses were empty because people had moved out because of the earthquake damage.
Yeah, that's why I was raising it. And then the second question is, it's kind of a big high-level question, but it seems to me when you look at the map, with all the development that's going on, are we simply overdeveloping in that northern eastern area, and is actually the catchment that we're trying to design for just too big, that we just end up with this kind of massive project where we should be looking at maybe other more local source sort of solutions? I mean, that's, that's something else.
That's a really a planning question. How do we deal with that growth? The Cranford Basin. That's recommendations on a previous report was that we developed that to a more accelerated style. What are the other alternatives? We are short on stormwater outfalls in that particular area. Very limited space for detention storage.
The areas to the northeast, are you referring to Preston, say?
Highfield, Preston's, but also all that infill that's happened in Papanui, Belfast.
Most of that water drains to the north into the Styx River catchment. Some of it comes south, and Preston's, for example, comes into number 2 drain or number 1 drain that goes straight to Horseshoe Lake, so that doesn't actually come into the Dudley catchment. There is some very complex stormwater arrangement around Cranford Basin, and water can interchange between the Styx and the Avon. But again, that goes into the Dudley diversion downstream of Dudley Creek. So my understanding of the catchment, that particular catchment that drains to Auckland Street area, is that it's pretty highly developed now. There will be infill development, and that will have to be a consideration moving forward, but that's getting addressed through stormwater management planning processes.
Ali?
Thank you. I'm just looking at the Jacob's report, and there's a mention on page 9. Talks about in conjunction with the widening of Dudley Creek, most private access bridges would need to be replaced with longer spans and typically at high levels. Now, there are a number of people in Banks Avenue who are already on the verge of getting earthquake repairs or rebuilds underway, and the insurance companies or whoever they're dealing with are actually looking at replacing the bridges with bridges that are of the same width as the one that's already there. Have you had any, who would end up paying for those should new bridges be needed after, if that's what we do, that channel is widened? And have you considered that and costings and so forth?
Yeah, through Chair. We've had a number of discussions with private bridges that need to be removed, altered, and we've been discussing it with both the owners and insurance companies and their project management officers. So there are a number, and where we require a wider bridge than was there previously, we would pay the difference in cost between the rebuild and the wider bridge. So there's
what about the ones that are already being replaced, John? So there was a woman I spoke to last week, and the rebuild is going to happen before any work is done, if in fact that's the option we go with. So there'll be a brand new bridge put there for the current width, will the council then be up for the entire cost of a new bridge to fit the new span?
Some of the new consents have a new flood level to come back to, so to get a building consent, they have to come back to the new flood level. So there's a difference. If we want to go beyond that again, then there would be a level. So
what if the channel's wider?
that would be an incremental cost, and I'd be interested to know who you might be, if someone hasn't had that conversation. I know we're having a conversation with a number of these owners who are in the process of getting their bridges replaced or renewed.
Very clear. Let me rephrase it. There are people who are rebuilding their houses. Currently the river is so wide. When they have their rebuild done, the insurance company or whoever it is will rebuild a new bridge to fit that width. When and if we decide to go down the track of widening along Banks Avenue, and there's another whatever it is that makes the river wider, and you have a brand new bridge that's been put there, who is responsible for picking up the tab for putting a brand new bridge in there to replace the brand new bridge?
Yeah, if we miss that boat, then it'll be a council cost, because we'll have to bear that cost. But we're having the conversation with the insurance company, Southern Response, and Arrow, their project managers, to try and capture as many as we can before they go to construction. So that's a work in progress, and we've been having for several months that conversation has been going on.
Now, we've got a sort of the foreshadowed motion, and the question is do we want to move it as an amendment to the main motion, or whether we accept that this is what we're going to be debating? And I guess that I wouldn't mind some advice on that before I get a seconder. Did you, David, want to?